thanks to the Society for Anglo-China Understanding, which I think is a great institution at a time where there is a great need for countries, especially the United Kingdom, with its past links to China, to understand the dynamics facing the bilateral relations. Um, so let me try to take you through some of the dynamics in this relationship. Um, Let me just try to move the it used to work here. Okay. Um, Now, we are now in an upended world. First of all, I'd like to highlight the so-called American-led liberal world order that really brought along great stability, prosperity, and cooperation amongst all countries around the world. A world order founded on liberal values, founded on free trade, and also commonly accepted rules of international trade, and underpinned by the World Trade Organization and other institutions, and of course, with respect to national sovereignty under the United Nations Charter. Now, this American-led order, of course, after the Second World War, America has been the most powerful country on the planet, not only in the military, but also in terms of trade, in terms of technology, in terms of providing an umbrella for peace and stability in the region. Now, this order seems to be now being upended by President Trump 2.0. You can see that, first of all, the influence of the United States seems to be much more constrained compared with past decades. First of all, you look at the catastrophic war on Iraq, and it's really driving the post-Iraq war. Of course, handing the government of Iraq to the Taliban, and in fact, it's driving the Iraq more into Iran's orbit, particularly after the historic rapprochement between the Sunnis and the Shiites brokered by China. And of course, the Iraq war is a total disaster in terms of cost to the American taxpayer, but also a lot of lives have been squandered almost for nothing. And then, of course, in Afghanistan, in spite of the war dragging on for years, at great expense to human lives and blood and treasure, is now handing over the Afghanistan to the Taliban. As I said, I mean, you look at the costs to the American taxpayer is horrendous. And while the American society remains highly divided in terms of inequality, where the richest few percent controls a large chunk of the nation's wealth. And then another sign of Americans' declining influence or attraction around the world is that the kind of a war over Ukraine. Trump seems to be wants to end the world. First of all, he touted his desire to end the world in 24 hours. But now the war is dragging on with very little to show for it, with also a loss of human lives, and both on the Russian side and the Ukrainian side. And then he also referred to the possibility that someday Ukraine could be Russian, and you can see that China is now becoming much more powerful than before, controlling, of course, is the world's largest manufacturer and trader. It, in fact, is the largest trading partner to 128 countries around the world, compared with only 58 for the United States. And then, of course, it produced most of the world's consumer products, all the products around the world. You could go to any department store, anywhere, either in this country or in Canada or in United States. Most of the products are made in China. Even if they're not marked made in China, China is embedded in it in terms of components, in terms of parts, in terms of rare earths and other materials, but also in terms of logistics, because the world's 7 largest container ports out of the top 11 are located in China, including Hong Kong. And you can see that there is a intensifying rivalry for international influence between China and the United States. Um, Let me try to move it on. Hmm, um, it's not moving. Let me just see. Oh, okay. I need to use this a bit. Um, Sorry, I'm a little bit clumsy. So, um, okay, right, okay. Right. Now, when Trump regained the White House the second time, the first statement he made was to take over Greenland, um, largely because of the rare earths there. And he wanted to make the Canada the 51st state of the United States, again trampling on Canada's sovereignty. And of course, he withdrew from the Paris Agreement on climate change, and he wanted to defund the World Health Organization. So that's another wrecking ball to the liberal world order founded and led by the United States. And of course, this ongoing trade war against China, but not only against China, but on Americans' traditional allies across the Atlantic, but also in Asia and all over the world. And using a dubious formula to calculate the tariffs and imposing the tariffs even on uninhabited islands, uninhabited by humans, but only by penguins near the Antarctica. Um, and this is a reflection of Americans' desire to bring back manufacturing back to the United States through the imposition of tariffs and through trying to strangle China's shipping industry, because the shipping industry, of course, carries the goods around, and the United States only builds only 1 out of 1,000 ships around the world, and that affects not only Americans' shipping fleet, but also its strength of its navy. Um, so you can see that that reflects a desire to stranglehold China's shipping industry with the hope of bringing shipping back to the United States. But that that seems to be not the way to go about it. And yet not yet announced is the so-called Mar-a-Lago Accord. If you Google that, you'll find that there is already a detailed preparation to launch this Mar-a-Lago Accord, because one of the things that holding the United States hegemony back is a huge debt, because the American has been in the enviable position of the so-called exorbitant privilege of being able to print money, and yet other countries around the world would still demand the US dollar, which is ubiquitous. But through the printing money, the debt has been building up, and the payment of debt every year now amounts to such a high level that it exceeds the entire defense budget. So through this Mar-a-Lago Accord, if you Google that, you'll find out the details. The intention is to launch 100-year U.S. Treasuries, but which do not pay any interest at all. In other words, it's a 100-year bond, and then it could be returned to the buyer maybe after only 50 years with increased value. but there is no interest payment at all. So the answer is that why should countries buy this kind of bond? If we look at how these American treasuries are owned, a large part of them is owned by American domestic institutions, including large wealth management funds or the national um, um, uh, funds for pensions and so on and so forth. They buy about maybe 60% of the U.S. Treasuries. Now, if this 100-year bond are sold to these companies or these national companies, they can use this as a collateral to borrow very, very cheaply from the US government because these bonds are underwritten by the US government. So that's the kind of strategy. People say that Trump doesn't have a strategy, and it seems that the strategy is to use tariffs, to use this 100-year bonds to bring down the U.S. debt so that there's more money to spend on the military and the economy. But of course, these blunt instruments are unlikely to work. Um, then, of course, there is another disastrous development around the world where American hegemony is turning a blind eye to. It's the helplessness and the humanitarian disasters of biblical proportions over Gaza. Um, so every day, children being massacred in the name of eradicating Hamas. But Hamas is more than an organization; it's a movement. When I was in Hong Kong, I had a talk with the Israeli consul general in his office, and was trying to sell to me that Israel is justified by all means to eradicate Hamas. And I said, well, Hamas is a movement, and if people got killed, there are more people joining the Hamas. And behind it all is Israel's demand for a separate statehood. And then the Palestinians' demand for statehood is supported by most of the members of the United Nations. Um, Now, another challenge to Americans' influence around the world, of course, is the rise of China. Many in the United States are seeing China's influence strengthening, and as borne out by the PEW Research Center. I've already said that China is now the world's biggest manufacturer and trader. And now we're seeing the dominance of China's electric cars, the electric vehicles around the world, because they are so well advanced in technology and so competitively priced that even with tariffs, still a lot of people would buy the Chinese electric cars because extremely well designed, with the latest technologies and with large percentage of in price differential. But then that is also hollowing out the electric car markets and around the world, and that's not very good for China's relations. And of course, China's now found a stranglehold over Americans' is Achilles' heel, which is the rare earths. Now, the rare earths, and it doesn't depend on where they are, because a lot of the rare earths, even though China controls about 60 or 70% of the supply, but there are other supply areas. But the major bottleneck is the processing, because the processing takes years to develop, and they're very polluting, highly polluting, and they are fractionalized depending on the final product, whether the product goes into the mobile phone or whether it goes into the F-35 fighter jet. The processing of specific rare earths are different, and they're very, very complicated, extremely polluting, and China has been developing these processes for decades because then nobody wants to touch them. Now that is American strength is a stranglehold. It's Americans' Achilles' heel, and it goes in the heart of the global supply and value chain. As I said, I mean, it's almost all products, high-tech products, mobile phones, drones, military equipment, F-35 fighter jets. They all depend on these rare earths. Now, another dynamic is China's development of its AI, newest AI model, DeepSeek, which does not require a lot of data centers, which are very expensive, very highly energy intensive. But then only DeepSeek only takes only a fraction of the energy cost, and then developing a model which is equally good, if not better. Another dynamic is borne out by the Australian Strategic Policy Institute, the ASPI research, this table right in the bottom with the color table, showing China's leading in 37 out of the 44 leading technologies that define the 21st century, including big data, the Internet of Things, artificial intelligence, energy, not 100%, but sufficient for China to be in the commanding heights. Another slide that brings out China's technological advance is the building of its own space station right from the scratch. The American led so-called International Space Station excluded China from the very start, but included Russia. But this American-led International Space Station is near its useful life, whereas China developed its own Tiangong space station right from the scratch. It's now on course to land a man on the moon by 2030. Last but not least is China's modernization of its military, including aircraft carriers, including various battleships, and of course hypersonic weapons. And in terms of numbers, the China's Navy is already the world's largest navy by number, if not by technology. So, and as I try to explain, China is so embedded in the world supply and value chain that any kind of decoupling is unlikely to succeed, even though some coupling, of course, is happening as manufacturers, some manufacturing are outsourced to Vietnam, to Malaysia, and other Asian countries. But at the end of the day, all these components have China embedded in it, as I was explaining, and also in China's logistics. The top 7 container ports out of the top 11 are in China, including Hong Kong. So there are, look at the types of supply chains around the world, the supply chains, the commodity chains, the value chains, the regional value chains. China is now occupying a central position. Now, of course, there is a great deal of narrative. China is not a democracy. And in recent years, it seems that the China's government is not legitimate. And then for tracing back decades, the famous thinker Francis Fukuyama, maybe about 20 years ago, thought the world history would come to an end because there was only one model that fits the whole world. It's the Western model based on democracy, based on elections. However, because of the rise of China and because the way that is supported by the Chinese people, are also borne out on the right-hand side bottom part, the research by the Endowment Trust Barometer based in New York, and then on the top right-hand side, research based in the done by the Harvard Kennedy School a couple of years ago. And they all look at how governments, peoples around the world support their government. And China ranked top, as you can see from the bottom chart of the Endowment Trust Barometer based in New York. And also this is also borne out by the Harvard Kennedy School, because even though it's not democratic, even though there are repressions, even though there are what's and all, but then the lives of most of the people under the communist regime have been dramatically improved over the past 40 years. They've never seen anything like it. And even though they're not happy with a lot of things about the government, they do support the government to almost 100%. And then if you look around the world, it seems that the democratic tide is now receding, and only 8% of the world's population live in full democracy. Even the United States, according to this index, is not regarded as a full democracy, is a flawed democracy. So the rhetoric about democracy is the only formula that works, just like the way one runs one's family is the way I run my family, and that's the way that all other families should be run, is a false narrative. Not that China's model can be replicated, not that it is to be lauded, but then, of course, there is a good grounds for this legitimacy. And then you have a rising Global South, the Global South being mostly in the developing nations. So the Global South now is a formidable force as the economies have been developing, representing 85% of the world population, 39% of the GDP, 3 out of the 4 largest economy in the world by 2030, China, India, and Indonesia. And then, of course, the BRICS group, Brazil, Russia, India, and China, South America, a lot of the members have either proposed to join or have already joined, including Arab countries. And of course, the rising influence of the African Union, representing the African countries, and then the Union of South American nations. So these are the collective organizations representing the interests, the development interests of their member states. And in Asia, the ASEAN group of countries, even though they have differences, but they are relatively united to guard against the common interests. Not that they're going to form a bloc, but they're adopting a more nuanced relationship between the United States and China. They don't want to be forced to pick sides. Similarly, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization talk about the Central Asian countries, which are landlocked, which are also linked by China's Belt and Road initiative. And then you can, as I was highlighting earlier, the Middle East is also changing. And then they are now both Iran and Saudi Arabia, which are, of course, rivals for decades, if not total enemies. They are now forming a much closer relationship, a kind of rapprochement brokered by China. And they are united, for example, behind the Palestinians' demand for statehood. They're condemning the Americans' unilateral bombing of the Iranians' facilities, and of course the war over Gaza, and the demand for statehood of the Palestinians, supported by most members of the United Nations, especially those in the Global South. What is changing in the Middle East is the end of the world age, and a former Saudi Arabian oil minister, Sheikh Yamani, about 20 years ago, he made a really insightful remark. And he said, of course, he passed away many years ago, but when he said that, it was more than 20 years ago, and he said the age of oil would come to an end, not for lack of oil, just like the age of stone, which ended not for lack of stone. So you can see that all the Middle East countries, they're pivoting towards innovation, and you can see Saudi Arabia, the path 2030, and so on. So you can see the world is so changing so rapidly with DeepSeek, AI, the robotic revolution, where you're even seeing humanoids that they look like they're robots, but they have human skin, and they have and they are even the ability to think and respond to spontaneous questions. And the whole world now is embracing electric cars thanks to the impact of climate change. And as I said, China is now occupying a central position, controlling, as it does, of the key materials like cadmium and other minerals, and also the technology to develop the batteries. So the reason why I mentioned that the technology, China's technological advances earlier. So these are not humanoids, but these are robots. And then you can see that in some cities in China, they're even acting as waiters in restaurants. Some of the restaurants are totally staffless, and because the meals are cooked in kitchens operated by robots. And then, of course, smart technology is applied is being adopted in city management, in services, communications, and you're seeing the growth of driverless cars in certain parts of in certain China cities, and also the rise of the digital economy. When I was just arrived a couple of weeks, and I've already found that even the China's digital platform, the Temu, TEMU, are selling all sorts of products, high quality products, but of course they're cheap products, consumer products. I was telling Barnaby this afternoon that I was looking for a padlock, and I went to Argo and was selling for £12, but I went to the China website. I mean, it's selling for £1, £1.50, because there's a surplus of all these products. And of course, you can't make much money with £1.50, including free delivery. I mean, it's very difficult to beat, but that's going to upend a lot of the relationships, you see. So bearing in mind all these changes, is a non-zero-sum based new world possible? Because the world is facing a lot of challenges. You have of course, the famous geopolitical thinker and author, Graham Allison, his famous theme about the Thucydides trap, when there's a serving world hegemon feels threatened. And then you look back the past 500 years, in 16 or 17 of these cases, where an existing superpower feels under challenge, 12 of these cases ended in war. So this is called the Thucydides trap. Are we in one of these traps? Are we in a world when there is no ruling power, a world in total disarray? Is America in retreat, or we are facing a no man's world? And then, of course, there are more and more armed conflicts around the world, let alone climate change, the pandemics, and then a huge inequality around the world, when the world's top 1% controls over half, nearly half, 46% of the world's wealth, and there's still not enough, let alone the rise of terrorism. And then, of course, the WTO is also under challenge, as the dispute resolution mechanism is now being scuttled by the United States not fielding the judges. And then, of course, if you look at the composition of the United Nations Security Council, the permanent members, they are the relics of the so-called victors of the Second World War, but they bear no relationship to the change power dynamics around the world, the rise of the global South, and then a lot of countries, for example, the European Union, if being united, should have a voice. Likewise, what about the African Union or the Arab League? So I think that this calls for a reform of the United Nations Security Council. Of course, would call for a closer cooperation between some of the leading nations, including the United Kingdom and China. And then, of course, the crash between the United States and China, the kind of war instability in Africa, and then you can see the various 10 threats to global health, and then human values are under challenge. The growth, peace, and happiness, the road to green transition is still fraught, as the United States are focusing more on drill with oil and gas rather than the green energy. And the sustainable development goals of the United Nations are still facing a lot of challenges, let alone the concept of common prosperity. In all the while, President Xi has developed three initiatives, which are, of course, many countries still think that this is only rhetoric, but the idea seems to resonate with what's happening. The Global Development Initiative concentrates on the importance of development needs of the Global South, in other words, growing jobs, relieving poverty, combating climate change, combating terrorism, that kind of thing. The development of countries so that they are empowered and not just depend on aid. A global initiative, security initiative, is to take into account the security of not only one country but other countries around the world, so that the security of one country doesn't trump the security of another country. And the Global Civilization Initiative, of course, the rise of some of the ancient civilization countries like China, India, and the Middle East, and dates back well before the founding of the modern Western countries. And the civilizations of different ideology, different culture, and there is a need for these cultures and civilizations to understand one another and to find a cooperate. So what about Britain-China relationship set in this context? You can find this latest book in the bookstores. I read it, almost finished it now, by Jeremy Hunt, who was briefly, I think, the Chancellor, but also Foreign Secretary. Can we be great again? That's about the United Kingdom, because Britain, of course, oversaw the largest empire the world has ever seen. But now it's of course, is only a mid-sized country. But that book highlights a number of areas where the UK can pull its weight as a security anchor, as the democratic champion, tackling mass migration, tackling climate and energy challenges, promoting free trade. And then, of course, during the COVID pandemic, British scientists and also medical institutions invented some of the more potent anti-COVID drugs, and acting as a human rights voice, and also promoting technology, the next Silicon Valley, and adopting a global mindset. So most of these agendas involve China. Security, of course, in the Asia Pacific, democratic champion, the kind of values that should be promoted in China, the climate change. Of course, China is the world's supplier of green energy, but still is the world's largest consumer of coal. Free trade, and some people say that China's embrace of the World Trade Organization still contained kind of infringements, pandemic prevention, human rights, and then, of course, technological cooperation. As for the United Nations, about these 5 permanent members, is for consideration. I wrote this paper for a Rome-based think tank called the World Geostrategic Insights. You can Google that, World Geostrategic Insights, based in Rome. And they published my paper in multiple languages, in English, in French, in Spanish, in Russian, in Arabic, and in Chinese. So I look at it, and I suggested that, of course, you can't have too many countries which have a veto vote. But then there's a need to bring in the European Union, there's a need to bring in the African Union, there's also the need to bring in the Arab League. But of course, you can't take away everybody, and you've got to maintain the balance. So the way is to France to give up its seat, but replaced by the European Union. And that way, you still preserve the United States, Britain, the European Union representing the Western Bloc, and you have China, Russia, to a certain extent, Africa and the Arab League representing the non-Western bloc. So it's a bit of balance there. So that's an idea for people to think about. Now, the United States, and there seems to be some self-doubt recently, but then, of course, the United Kingdom should be punching above its weight. After all, if you look at the soft power index around the world, the soft power 2025, the UK still ranks very highly. Um, and, um, and of course, ranked by innovation, the United Kingdom still have a very high rank, supported by its leading academic institutions. And then in terms of emissions, carbon emissions, it's still one of the lowest emission countries, at least in Europe. And then for life sciences, there's the holy triangle of leading life science research formed by the Oxford, Cambridge, Art, and London. And last but not least, the monarchy is a brand. I mean, there was a lot of things, good things about the monarchy. It's got great influence around the world as a brand, despite of some of the scandals, if you like. But also the British Commonwealth. It has great influence amongst the Commonwealth countries representing the Global South. Now, what about Hong Kong? In 2002, when I was representing Hong Kong, I hosted a celebration lunch on the 5th anniversary. I had the former Iron Lady Margaret Thatcher as my guest of honor, and standing next to her was her former Chief of Staff, Lord Powell. The same name as our host here, Barnaby. And then, of course, that was then, and that was later on that we had the anti-extradition bill, a lot of protests in Hong Kong, and of course the Article 23, there's a lot of, again, protests resulting and then infiltrated by a lot of pro-independence movement, holding the flag about Hong Kong independence, that rattled Beijing, forcing Beijing's hand to introduce the national security law. And then a lot of this hides the unfortunate misunderstanding of the Hong Kong's constitution, which is Hong Kong's basic law. Because Hong Kong's basic law is Beijing's law. In a way, it is not a complete following the China-UK agreement on handing over to Hong Kong. And the China-UK deal, there was no provision, repeat, no provision for universal suffrage in the deal between the UK and Beijing. However, Beijing took it on its own initiative to insert universal suffrage in the basic law, but on the condition that the candidates must be pre-screened, because the Hong Kong has been divorced from the motherland for so long, and then they need to build trust. And of course, any chief executive of Hong Kong must be working in close cooperation and be trusted by Beijing. Hence, this imposition in the Hong Kong's basic law, Hong Kong's constitution, for screening of the candidates. But that's not accepted by the pro-democrats. And then, of course, the Western rhetoric completely buried this fact, which led to eventually the declaration of the pro-independent forces, sort of forcing Beijing's hand into enactment of the national security law. And that, of course, poisoned the relationship between the UK and China. Now, the situation is now improving. According to the FRSA Institute, in October 24, the FRSA Institute is a world-renowned think tank in Canada. We are now ahead of Singapore and Switzerland as the world's freest economy. You can't be the freest economy if the governance is not free. And of course, the Hong Kong is now hosts the largest concentration of the world's top 100 universities. And what is more, what is a testament to Hong Kong's attraction is the Hong Kong Stock Exchange. In June 2025, additional funds seeking listing in Hong Kong, something like $446 billion, up 285% compared with last year. And then Hong Kong is set to reclaim the throne as the world's #1 IPO, initial public offering center, after a lapse of 5 years. So I think that Hong Kong is now on the way back, and this is underpinned by the recent establishment of an international organization under the UN Charter for mediation, and supported by something like nearly 50 nations. And they chose Hong Kong to house its international headquarters for mediation. So mediation is not just between businesses, it's also between countries, including conflicts. So I think this is a testimony to Hong Kong's trustfulness in terms of our rule of law and governance. Now, of course, we inherited a very valuable legacy of the rule of law. The British common law is still practiced in Hong Kong in spite of its past about the invading China, the Opium War. In spite of that, but Hong Kong inherited a very valuable heritage, which is the common law. And of course, the Hong Kong and China and UK should write the next chapter of stable development relationship. That's the recent remark between Starmer and President Xi, as reported in CCTV recently, harking back to all the dynamics I've outlined in the past slides. And the UK can capitalize the most valuable brands in the world. You look at the energy and accountancy, the Vodafone, the banks, the Tesco, Sky Television, and so on. So I think that there is a lot of good things about the UK as a brand. So what are some of the specific recommendations I have? First of all, I think that the UK can also broker an accord to promote trade, investment, and technology exchanges between the two countries. Zeroing on a number of fields: medical care, nuclear energy development, nuclear energy, and also sports, investment, finance, climate change, and culture. The UK businesses also capitalize on China's global market access by forming partnerships with Chinese companies, especially along the China's Belt and Road Initiative, which cover the large parts of the world. Especially in areas of financial services, energy, business advisory, and so on. And of course, last year when I visited London, I saw that the latest version of the electric cars in London, the black cabs. You can see that the electric version, at least half of them, are produced bearing the mark of LEV with a small c. I think Barnaby and I saw one, and I pointed out this to him. LEV stands for London Electric Vehicle. C stands for Coventry. So these cars are made in Coventry, but by a China-owned company. So producing jobs for the UK and adding to the Chinese economy. Now, I think that this model can be replicated not only throughout the UK, bringing jobs, investments, technology, growing, helping the host country to grow the economy, but it could also be replicated in Europe and possibly in the United States. Then you can see that there is a breakdown of Chinese companies in the UK already, and the more there are those, the better it is for the UK economy, not only in terms of investment, but also in terms of job creation. And of course, China now has the reputation of the world's largest and most efficient high-speed rail. All you need to go is to go to China, you hop on a high-speed rail, and you are in the next several hundred miles away in no time. Very efficient, very comfortable. And then how long does it take to build a high-speed rail in the UK? I mean, so if the UK can form partnership with China to build a national grid of high-speed rail in the United Kingdom, and that would serve the relationship very well. Of course, that there should be more joint efforts to build a digital trade platforms, because nowadays in this digital age, the way we conduct businesses are totally different. I mentioned about going to the e-commerce, but also especially large trading deals across the countries that could be done online. And of course, the China's are promoting the growth of the digital of the central bank digital currency, CBDC, backed by the central bank, just like a sovereign money, but it's digital. So I think that that's the way to go in the coming century. And of course, there are lots of attractions in China, and then through the maybe a visa-free, extending the visa-free arrangement to the United Kingdom. China has already given visa-free access to something like 40 countries, including a lot of Western countries. So the two countries can visit each other, some of the rare sites, particularly of natural beauty or historical significance, including Lhasa, Tibet, Macau, where I spent my boyhood. You see the yellow house on the right-hand side facing the facade in Paulo. When I was a boy, that house was derelict, but that's where I spent my boyhood, although I was born in Hong Kong. Last but not least, there should be more British judges to sit on Hong Kong's Court of Final Appeal. And even though there are still remain a number of judges, but we need more of them to strengthen the relationship. After all, Hong Kong is following a common law. And of course, what Hong Kong lacks is the kind of think tanks, international renowned think tanks like Chatham House and various others, and the European Council of Foreign Relations. So I think that some of these think tanks should form partnership and be established in Hong Kong, for example. And then, of course, the more sister relationships between the elite universities between the two countries, between China and the United Kingdom. And mutual exchanges of parliamentary groups, political groups, civil society groups, and journalist groups. And by promoting these exchanges, that should be very useful to increasing mutual understanding. And of course, joint scientific and space research. I mentioned the China space station. There is no reason why the UK cannot join China, cooperate China on specific space mission projects, and also deep sea research projects, and also research in the Antarctic and the Arctic. So I think that there's a huge opportunities because British scientists are amongst the world's very best. And last but not least, in the military, the UK may have a much smaller navy, a much smaller army, but it has one of the world's best defense training institutions. So including Sandhurst and the Royal College of Defense, and so then and also joint operations under the United Nations umbrella for peacekeeping and for anti-piracy operations. So I think that that's all I've got. I hope that this will give you some idea of so what I think is the chances for a closer UK-China relationship. And I love your questions. The more controversial questions, the more I love them.
Andrew,